I thought buying a 2026 Dacia Duster was one of the smartest money-saving decisions I could make. I was wrong. At first, the Duster seemed to have everything I wanted: rugged looks, practicality, modern technology, and a price that made expensive European SUVs look ridiculous. But after living with it, a few problems started appearing that completely changed my opinion. Welcome back to Supercar. Today, I'm revealing exactly why I regret buying my 2026 Dacia Duster and the things I wish I had known before handing over my money. So subscribe to Supercar, because this isn't a showroom review. It's the reality of living with the Duster every day. The 2026 Dacia Duster looks like a smart bargain, until you spend a full day behind the wheel. The first thing that surprised me was the driving experience. Yes, this Duster is more refined than the previous generation, but compared with rivals like the Volkswagen T-Roc and Skoda Kamiq, the steering, ride, and overall refinement still feel noticeably less polished. Then there's the technology. The modern screens and smartphone integration look impressive, but the infotainment can feel basic and occasionally laggy. And once you hit the motorway, another compromise becomes impossible to ignore: road and wind noise. Around town, these issues may seem minor, but after hours of driving, they can completely change how you feel about the car. And this is where my budget bargain started looking a lot less convincing. The Duster is affordable until you start adding the equipment you actually want. Bigger screens, upgraded trims, wheels, and driver assistance features can push the price surprisingly close to better-equipped rivals. At that point, the biggest question is simple: is it still a bargain? Then there's the engine. The 2026 Duster offers mild hybrid and full hybrid powertrains with respectable power figures. But on the road, the engine and gearbox can feel less smooth and refined than what you get from more expensive competitors. On paper, everything makes sense. Behind the wheel, it's a different story, and automatic buyers should pay especially close attention. The full hybrid Duster brings a completely different driving experience, but even here, there are compromises. Reviews have noted that the hybrid's automatic gearbox can occasionally make less than perfect decisions, even though the shifts themselves are smooth. That doesn't make the system bad, but if you expect the effortless smoothness of a premium hybrid, this is one area where the Duster can remind you exactly what you paid for. Then I realized the Duster's biggest strength could also become its biggest weakness. The Duster is extremely practical for the money. Depending on the powertrain and configuration, boot capacity can reach up to 594 liters, increasing to as much as 1,696 liters with the rear seats folded in the UK mild hybrid specification. That practicality is fantastic, but the interior still uses inexpensive materials in places, and you can feel the cost cutting if you pay attention. It isn't pretending to be a luxury SUV, but after living with it, those cheaper touches become much harder to overlook. And this is the part that surprised me most. I actually started missing the basics. The Duster has gained more technology and driver assistance features, but sometimes I found myself wishing Dacia had simply kept things simpler. The physical climate controls are a good example of what the company gets right. They're straightforward, easy to use, and don't require digging through menus. But elsewhere, extra digital features can add complexity without necessarily making the car better. The Duster's original appeal was its simplicity, and I'm not convinced every new feature improves that formula. But here's the twist: the Duster is still genuinely good at some things. This isn't a video saying the 2026 Dacia Duster is a bad car. In fact, that would be completely unfair. The latest Duster is more comfortable, more composed, more spacious, and more enjoyable to drive than the previous generation. Autocar describes it as better to drive, with improved damping, more precise handling, and decent capability away from the tarmac. And its value for money argument remains one of its strongest selling points. So why do I regret buying it? Because expectations change after you live with a car. Before buying it, I focused on the price, equipment, rugged styling, practicality, and the idea of getting more SUV for less money. After owning it, I started noticing the road noise, cheaper feeling areas of the cabin, basic infotainment, occasional powertrain compromises, and the fact that it still lacks the refinement of some competitors. And this is the question you should ask before ordering yours. Do you want the cheapest SUV that gives you a huge amount of space, practical equipment, and genuine character? Or do you want something that feels more polished, quieter, and more sophisticated every single day? Because the Duster can absolutely deliver the first experience, but it doesn't completely deliver the second. And that's why my regret isn't really about the Duster itself. My regret is that I expected the new Duster to feel like a much more expensive SUV simply because it looks so modern. It doesn't. It is still fundamentally a value-focused vehicle, and that's both its greatest strength and its biggest limitation. So, would I buy the 2026 Duster again? Honestly, I would think much harder before signing the order. I would test drive the exact engine and trim I wanted, spend serious time on the motorway, test the infotainment, listen carefully to cabin noise, and compare the final price, not the attractive starting price, with competitors. And that final price could completely change the decision. For example, Dacia's current UK pricing lists the Duster from £21,845 before metallic paint for the mild hybrid 140 expression, with higher trims and options increasing the total. That starting price is impressive. But the moment you build the specification you actually want, the smarter question becomes, how much are you willing to pay before the Duster stops being the obvious bargain? So maybe the 2026 Duster isn't a bad purchase. Maybe it's just a car you need to understand, and that's the real lesson. The 2026 Dacia Duster is practical, capable, stylish, and still one of the most interesting budget SUVs on the market. But it isn't perfect, and the compromises become much easier to see after the honeymoon period ends. So would you still buy a 2026 Dacia Duster after hearing all of this, or would you choose a more expensive SUV for the extra refinement? Let me know in the comments. And for more honest car reviews, ownership stories, hidden problems, and new car buying advice, subscribe to Supercar, because sometimes the best car isn't the one that looks like the best deal.